Okay. All right, ready to run. Hold on, let me just move this back and get a better view. A little more back. That should be good. I'm just going to close this. All right, here we are. Welcome to Dvar Malchus here. We began last week. This week is part 2 of the Dvar Malchus of Parshas Lecha from the year 5752. That is 29 years ago. I should drink from a cup. I don't have a cup over here. Oh, there is a cup. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. So I get to look more rabbinic. General, supposed to drink from a cup, not from a bottle. That's the more refined way. My question is on these little bottles, if it's okay to drink from the bottles. They're tiny little bottles. I would say it's good, even for the rabbi. But in order that I don't get into trouble with anybody complaining, I'm going to use the cup. All right, everyone. The main thing is Lecha. Ready to go. Okay. So last week, I'm just going to review the main point. He asked the question that what is the permanent significance of the commandment Lech Lecha? When Hashem tells us Lech Lecha, what is the permanent significance of that? How does that speak to us today? Because we read the Torah portion, it's supposed to be God speaking to us now, telling us, go to the land that I will show you. His question was, we've already conquered the land. It's already done. It's, in the days before the conquest of the land of Israel. So go to the land of Israel and you'll take possession of the land. But it's already accomplished. He also asked the question, because that's the part that we're going to address today, is that we know that from Lech Lecha begins the preparation for the giving of the Torah. We mentioned in the last class that all of history can be divided into 3 segments: 2,000 years of chaos, 2,000 years of Torah, 2,000 years of completion, which is the days of Mashiach, where things are already, the crop, the world has already revealing its yield, its crop. We're already seeing the refined reality of the days of Mashiach, the corrected world. So we said that Avram Avinu begins the 2000, literally in his life, he was 48 years old at the year 2000. I think, again, I think either 48 or 52, but I think it's 48 years old at the turn of the millennium. So he begins the preparation for the giving of that. We know that the whole period, the whole era of our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they did the groundwork. They plowed the field. So later, when we will plant the seeds and do the mitzvahs, they will take root. It's only because of the work that they did. They did not have the power in their mitzvahs, as we'll still discuss today, like we have. But it's only based on the work, on the fundamental work that they've done, this incredible work that they've done, which allows for us to be able to do what we are doing today. Now, the question then becomes, if the whole Lech Lecha was the beginning of the preparation for the giving of the Torah, today's days that we are already post the giving of the Torah, what then can possibly be the significance of the parsha of Lech Lecha, of the commandment Lech Lecha? Means go ahead and do the preparation for the Torah. We've already completed the receiving of the Torah. We've gotten it already. We've studied it already. We've explored it already. So why do we now have to go back to the very beginning, to the very preparation? So the theme that we learned last week, and this was really special, was that even though we think, at least regarding the land of Israel, even though we think we've already have the land of Israel in our possession, we don't really have it. And the reason is because when Avram Avinu was promised the land in this week's Torah portion, Parshas Lech Lecha, he was promised the land of 10 nations, and yet the Jews only took possession of 7 nations. It was because God only granted them 7 nations at that time. God tells them that in the future He's going to give them the other 3 countries. So at that time, they only had the land of the 7 nations. Now, as long as the land of the Eretz Yisroel is lacking those 3 added nations, not only does it mean that there's a part of what is meant to be the land of Israel that is lacking, but it actually weakens or diminishes the rest of the land. In other words, the 7 lands are also not in their fullest, the fullest power of what their spiritual power and their significance, because the 3 are lacking. When we complete the 3, we also elevate the other 7. So it's a serious deficiency. In that sense, God's promise to Avram that He would give him the land has never been fulfilled. And that's the significance of Lech Lecha to each and every one of us today. Do whatever you can. He says that's why Jews yearned all their life. It was all a yearning of Lech Lecha, that God is commanding. They heard it every year, and they constantly remember that. Wherever Jews were, throughout the diaspora, across the entire world, was always this L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. We want to go to Jerusalem. We want to complete the Lech Lecha. It's not just that they wanted. That's what he's saying. It's God's commandment to all the descendants of Avram Avinu, to the Jewish people. Lech Lecha, go see to it. Do whatever you have in your capability, in your ability, to see to it that we should already be able to take possession of the full land of Eretz Yisrael, because we've never really gotten it to its fullest. That's what we studied last week, and I spoke also about the prophecy that he says that it's particularly pertaining to this time, because in these days, when we're already at the threshold of the redemption, all the work that has been done or has been completed, it's even more important that we hear the very loud and thundering command of God to each and every one of us, which shouldn't be taken only as a national ambition or a national project, but an individual mandate for every single Jew. Go to the land of Israel, do what you can to take possession of the land of Israel, because we have to take the entire land. But what I mentioned last time as a prophecy is that the Rebbe then says that the way it's going to be given to us this time is not through battle and not through warfare. It's going to be given to us willingly and willfully from all the nations, and not only will they give us the full recognition on what is currently the land of Israel, but even the 3 extra lands that are going to be added, which is huge territory outside of what Israel is even talking about today, will be added on, and it will be done pleasantly, he says, in ways of pleasantness and peace, in a way that they themselves, the nations that are there now, are going to give it over to the land of Israel, to the Jewish people, which seemed to be a ridiculous thing. Even in a dream, you couldn't dream something like that would be possible. Israel surrounded with all its enemies. But as I pointed out last week, today's days, we are seeing how that is beginning to change. And it's a movement, and it's going to get more powerful and stronger and stronger and stronger. You can mark my words. It's not my words. It's based on what the Rebbe is saying over here. There is going to be a massive change of heart and transformation in the Middle East, and it's beginning, and it's no way to stop it. This is a tsunami, or rather, I would call it a avalanche. There is an avalanche of tshuva. I'm going to call it tshuva. Because it says Yishmael will do tshuva in the end of days. There's an unstoppable avalanche of tshuva that's starting in the Gulf states and is going to warm the hearts of all the Arabs, and they're going to willfully let the land of Israel be the land of Israel, and actually add on more when they sense, obviously, that God is changing their hearts. We are watching this. We are witnessing biblical prophecy, and that's awesome. That's what the Rebbe says. Now we're going to continue back, and I spoke about this in the past Monday class. Now we're going back to this very talk the Rebbe gave, and let's see what he says. We are holding over here in Perek at Siv Zayin, or Perek Zayin. He says like this: just like we've explained now how the Lech Lecha is applicable today regarding the conquest of the land, in as much that we still never took possession of the land, so that God's commandment is still in full force because it has never been completed, it has never been fulfilled. Same is also regarding this more spiritual concept of Parshas Lech Lecha. We said earlier that Lech Lecha also is spiritually, it's laying the groundwork as a preparation for the giving of the Torah. And what's the idea of the giving of the Torah, as we're going to speak more soon, is the unification of God and the world, unification of heaven and earth. And that unification, or that project of unifying heaven and earth, sanctifying the material world, that project is the work of Lech Lecha as an introduction to that. So the question that we're addressing is, but we've already received the Torah and we've accomplished already that fusion. So why do we need again the preparation? So that he's explaining now. And that is as follows. True that we've received the Torah, and to a certain degree we can say we're satisfied. We have already the complete Torah. In addition, but there's always the idea that the Torah, every day we say no sing Torah. That means every day we need to receive the Torah on a higher level. So we can say to some degree that the Lech Lecha that we're commanded with, to do the work of Avram, to do the work of our forefathers, is an inspiration, not for to do the prep work for the Torah, but to do in general, but to do the prep work for the Torah for today, Torah on a higher level. And tomorrow there's going to be the work of the prep work, so that we can receive and integrate the Torah of tomorrow. Yes, that's many, many levels. But then there is the big quantum leap, and that is when Moshiach comes. God is going to reveal the new Torah, as we discussed in earlier classes. What the verse says, Torah chadasha me'iti teitze, new Torah will come forth from me. It doesn't mean, as we discussed many times, to be very careful, it doesn't mean there is a new Torah, there will never be a new Torah. It means God will open up the Torah that we have now to levels of illumination and levels of insight and levels of understanding that is so inaccessible to us throughout all the exploration of Torah, throughout all of history, that it's going to be almost as if the Torah is a totally new Torah. That's how deep, that's how the powerful divine light of the Torah will come gushing forth when the Torah, it's as if we will say it then, we'll say, so that's what it really means. That's how it'll be so new, it'll be so revolutionary, so innovative, because God is going to be the one who will innovate, who will open up the mind of Mashiach in a way that no other human being ever understood, even surpassing Moshe's understanding and King Solomon and the greatest of sages, to levels so beyond that it's a total new Torah. That new Torah we have never yet touched. And for that new Torah, we need to do the preparation of Lech Lecha. So the Lech Lecha continues. The work, prepare yourself, activate whatever you can do in today's days, so that you can be ready for the giving of the Torah, which, even though it happened 3,333 years ago, it's about to happen on a much greater scale, so we still need that preparation. That's the idea. So again, just like we say regarding Eretz Yisroel, that we haven't really taken it to its fullest, the same is regarding the Torah. We haven't really received the Torah to what it really is, only a little tiny slice of it. Okay, so therefore Lech Lecha is applicable. Now, to understand that and appreciate that on a much deeper level, he says we need to first fundamentally understand why the parsha of Lech Lecha, and in which way is the commandment to Abraham, to Avram Avinu, to leave his ancient home in Mesopotamia and go to the land of Israel. How is that preparing the world for the Torah? In what way is that a preparation for the giving of the Torah? So to understand that, he says the idea which I mentioned earlier. What is the Torah all about? The Torah is all about the ability to take the material physical world and unify it with the divine. That holiness, that this physical world becomes holy. Holy means godly. That the physical and the godly becomes holy. Mashiach's world is going to be a holy world. Everything in the world will be holy. Everything in the world will display God. Everything in the world will have divine content in a very manifest, tangible way. And that connection, that physicality in the material, which the way it was created, and definitely the way we treated it and brought as a result of our perhaps mistreatment of this world, we brought the world to a state where the world is thick and dense, coarse and opaque, that it blocks anything holy and godly. It pulls us in the opposite. It pulls us to a denial of God and to a denial of holiness, to a type of corruption. That changes bit by bit as we apply Torah and mitzvahs to the world. Okay? That's what, and the main idea of here's the thing, the pivotal moment that allowed for that fusion was the actual moment at Sinai. Initially, it says that there was a great divide. It was actually impossible for us to bridge heaven and earth. It was impossible for us to experience the divine in the body, in the material, in the physical. There was a gap. In order to experience divinity, you had to live a life of celibacy. You had to live a life of what is it called? Some kind of a monk, of a hermit, a fast, disconnect, detach yourself from the physical. Almost like we do in Yom Kippur. We shut down the physical so we can raise ourselves up to a higher consciousness, to a higher awareness. So that's the way it was. Godliness was not accessible in the physical and through the physical. The giving of the Torah, that day when the Torah was given, again, 3,333 years ago, on the sixth day of Sivan, in the year 2448, that's the day that God broke this barrier. That was the barrier breaker. That was the greatest barrier breaker of all of time. And that was the divide between the world and the divine. And that's why God gave us mitzvahs. And once we start doing mitzvahs, we begin to connect every object that we come into contact with which we do a mitzvah, which involves all aspects and all materials of the world. These things start to become connected to godliness and revealing godliness. We might not see it, the material physical world, until the last moment when our God allows us to see it finally. Until then, it still has a thin membrane, we can say, that's still hiding the powerful lights that there are already, the powerful divinity that's in the physical world. But that will give away, and we will suddenly realize the awesomeness of what we've accomplished through the charity that we gave, through the visiting of the sick that we did, through the prayer that we did, through the tefillin that we put on, through the Shabbos candles that we did, through the mezuzah that we fixed to our door, through the kosher food that we ate, and it goes through the keeping of Shabbos, and all the godly things that we do. We will then experience all that divinity that has been brought into the material physical world. Okay, but that power was only there given to us by the giving of the Torah. Now, even though this great breakthrough, the breaking of the barrier, happened only at the giving of the Torah, but the preparation for that, the groundwork to be able to achieve that fusion and that attachment, started already in the days of our forefathers. It started with Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu was the initiator of all of this, and then Isaac, Yitzchak, and then Jacob, Yaakov, and the 12 tribes, the Jewish people while they were in Egypt, their work that they accomplished, the exile of Egypt, and finally the leaving of Egypt and the march towards Har Sinai. All of this was one string of preparatory stages that were needed in order to make that possible. It was a certain purification. But where does it start? It starts with Abraham, but not at Abraham's birth, not even when Abraham recognizes God, not even when Avram Avinu starts serving Hashem, but rather at the moment, this is the turning point. When God tells Avram Avinu, when Hashem speaks to him and tells him, Lech Lecha, that's when God sparks, with this commandment, he sparks the Jewish enterprise. This is where Judaism begins. This is where we as a people start to contribute our contribution to the world. And that is not just to civilize and to moralize the world, but rather to make the world godly. That's the idea. There's such a word, divinitize, but actually reveal, not God forbid what that can mean, as idolatry, the opposite. To make everything unified with the oneness of God, that it should express it. And this is where it starts. It starts with Lech Lecha, with the first commandment to the first Jew. And that's the theme of this Torah portion. This is the turning point. That's why this is such a happy, powerful parsha. This is the parsha that is the seed of all Jewish contribution to the world. And all of Torah. It's all, and this is the enabler. This is the empowerment to start the project, to initiate phase one of the project. And its conclusion, the last portion of, and in this, every element of the parsha, Avram going down to Egypt and his war against the four kings and his saving of Lot, the whole story, it all evolves around this point, but it reaches its strongest and deepest effect or expression when Avram has his circumcision, as we're soon going to see. The circumcision of Avram Avinu, which is the end, it's the closing verses of Lech Lecha, is kind of the climax of this Torah portion, of laying the foundation for everything that the Jewish people are going to do. And what is that? The fusion of spiritual and the physical, the godly and the world. Now, how is that? So he begins and he explains like this. Even before Lech Lecha, Avram Avinu was a terrific human being, a noble human being, a wonderful person, a good man. Again, at 3 years old, he recognized God. Not only did he recognize God for himself and separate himself from the trends, he wasn't a follower, Avram was a leader, and he went against the tide. The whole world was moving in one direction. That's why Avram was called Avram HaIvri, because he stood on the other side. He didn't follow the norm, he didn't follow the style. He stood up for what he believed and knew as absolute truth. But it wasn't only to defend his own ways that he stood up. He created a following, and it was dangerous because the people that were on the other side were not too nice, and they were very, very vehemently against him, to the point that they took Avram Avinu and they were willing to squish him, to literally rip him to pieces. Or, as they tried, and they actually did, they threw him into a furnace, the king, Nimrod. And so he actually served God so deeply and so strong that he sacrificed his life. He paid the ultimate price. He intended to pay that. God rescued him, but on his own volition, he would have been ashes already. He would have been out. So you're talking about nobility, talking about greatness, talking about awesomeness. And Maimonides goes on to explain what kind of impact Avram had. Maimonides explains how in the laws of chapters of idolatry, right in the beginning, the Rambam says how Avram Avinu began to explore and till he was able to attain the way of truth, and he began to call out in a great voice to the entire world and let everybody know of his monotheistic belief. And he's all just quoting what Rambam says, and he calls Avram Avinu. It's interesting how he refers to Avram Avinu as the Eitan, as the strong one, as the mighty one, because it was a mighty type of a service. So this is pretty serious accomplishment. But it's not only that he was so noble and he was so powerful and he did so much in order to spread the truth. So he's an incredible activist for truth, for goodness, and going up against the whole world. But it wasn't only that he was enacted, but he actually impacted. He impacted his world, his environment very strongly. Where do we see that? Because the place where Avram lived was the most corrupt of all. It was called Haran. Ancient Mesopotamia, in the Hebrew language, in Torah, it's called Chara. Chara means anger, wrath. It ignited God's wrath. The community was so corrupt. It was a place, sometimes you read something's going on in certain cities, they're looting, they're destroying, they're breaking, and you get angry, and then God also gets angry when his world is being destroyed. Haran in particular was a place that God got angry, so you can imagine the nature of the culture over there. And yet, what does the Pasuk say in the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha about what Avram did before God told him Lech Lecha? It says that Avram already had created a huge following. It says that Avram took all the people Anefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, that him and Sarah, his champion wife Sarah, together they had achieved so much. They converted so many people to their monotheistic belief. in where the emphasis of Torah, in Haran. That means they had impact. They had already a whole academy, they had a whole school, they had a whole association, they had a whole movement going. That's huge. And so much so, only the Rebbe can see this, that Avram had impact on that godless environment, that he actually changed the character of the place. Because when Hashem tells Avram Avinu to leave his home in Lech Lecha, he says, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, from your land, me'moladecha, from your birthplace, me'beit avicha, from your father's house. But the emphasis, it's your father's house. It's your birthplace, it's your land. That means that Avram Avinu had his fingerprints all over it. Avram Avinu had a huge impact on the land, on the birthplace, on his father's house, that he impacted and he changed them, or else it wouldn't be called his land. He would have been a foreigner, he would have been an outcast. That means that Avram's impact on the land was huge. Yet, God tells him, leave. And not only that, all the work that he did, including this work of impacting it to become considered his land. The Rebbe adds an interesting idea, as it really says that his father Terach, who was the biggest manufacturer of idols, okay, he owned the company, idols.com was Terach's company, okay? So he had the brand name of idols, okay? And it was Avram's father. So this very Terach, it says, did tshuva. He repented, which means that he had such a change of heart, and then Avram in fact impacted. Yet, what he's going with this is, yet notwithstanding all of that, the Jewish chapter didn't begin yet. That's Avram being a great human being, but that's not Judaism. Judaism begins at the turning point when God tells him, when Avram is already 75 years old, he's got a whole, you can write books on the man, and I'm sure they did. And others at this point would already be, sitting on their porch, sipping tea and retiring. And Avram Avinu at this point is told by God, leave it all behind and off you go. March to the land that I will show you. So the question is asked, hold it. Why is all of that not going into Avram's biography? When I say biography is, if you had a private biography of Avram Avinu, you would have that whole story. But in the biography that the Torah writes out for him, the Torah begins the Abraham story at 75. And the explanation the Rebbe says over here is, the reason why all this amazing accomplishment is not, this would be such a lousy biography if you would put out something of a special man. Imagine making something on Abraham Lincoln and starting when he's like 50 years old. I don't know how long Abraham Lincoln lived until he was assassinated, but whatever age he was. But imagine starting at someone's age when they're, 25 years old. What happened with the 25 years of the early life? Everybody always wants to know, what was his childhood like? And here Hashem just skips over it all, doesn't mention any of that. And the reason for that is, the Rebbe says, because the Jewishness of Amram is the fusion, the making the world godly. And until that point, Avram did not have the ability to do that, and he didn't accomplish that. He fought the world, he called out God's name, but the world itself, the material, physical elements of the world did not attain any godliness to them. And he says it's hinted to, and it was in one of the two ways. Either because Avram Avinu himself was a super spiritual person and he would rise beyond the material physical elements of the world, and that's why his name was, at that time, Avram later has a name change, but at that time his name was Avram, which means exalted father, which means that means that he was hovering above the world. He was higher than the physical. He transcended it. He was above it. Or even if he says he did work in the world, like engaged people, he wasn't a hermit, as we said earlier. He engaged people, he involved people, and so on and so forth. It still did not have a lasting impact on the lowly elements of this world. They remained lowly, and he remained godly, and maybe he sparked some people's spiritual side, but in general, the physical world remained in its coarseness and in its lowliness, and in its opposition to God. Where did it all change? When was there a complete flip, a trend? Was when he fulfilled God's commandment of Lech Lecha. When God told him, Lech Lecha, leave from your land, from your birthplace, that's when he was given a power of the impossible. He basically was, through the divine commandment, he was then freed from the limitations of any human being before him, of any creature, of any existence. And that is to merge the highest and the lowest, to bring them together. That was given to him at that. And it has to be contained in the nature of the commandment as well. It's not only because God then commanded him, go to the land of Israel, and over there I'll give you this power, to sublimate physicality. But it has to be actually expressed in the nature of the commandment. So what was the nature of the commandment? Go out, leave everything behind, which represents, as Chassidus explains, also psychological limitations. Leave your mind, leave your heart, leave your desires, leave everything that defines you, and just follow me. Abandon yourself completely. Let go of everything you've already, your entire persona that defines you as a great godly being. Be willing to let go and just follow the unknown, and I'll show you where to go and what to do, and to engage on a whole new project, way beyond and on a far greater scale than you could have ever imagined. And by doing that, God says, I will take you to the land that I will, I will take you to the land that I will show you. So the simple meaning is, I'll point you to the land. You'll set out on the journey. Now you don't know. And just walk, go, without a GPS. Just let go. I'll be your GPS. And you'll kind of be led to that place. It's a simple meaning. There's a deeper meaning, which the Hasidic masters explain. Hasidus explains, Elo Arek, to the land, Asher Areko, in which I will display you, which means I will show you the real you. I will turn you inside out. I will peel away the trappings, the limitations that are now defining you as an accomplished human being. I will strip all of that, and I will reveal your essence of your true being, of who you really are. And where will that be revealed? Elo Aretz, in the land. That means it's not going to be a revelation somewhere in the seventh heaven. It's going to be down here on earth. So what we're getting over here is a powerful, an amazing, without God's empowerment, obviously Avram couldn't do that. But on his end, it was also required an enormous devotion and dedication to be able to leap beyond everything he understood, knew, identified with, and with total, as we said before, abandonment of what was his previous self at the age of 75. When you have so much, you come to someone and you ask someone to help you with a project. So if they're already, they're tired, they're already done, they can help a little bit, and even if they'll help, they'll lend help in the things that they're accomplished in. They'll give you some advice, they'll give you some whatever it is that is within their field. But to ask someone that has already reached this maturing age and has so much medals and certificates on the wall, and an acclaimed author, writer, teacher, entrepreneur, whatever, he's got so much to show. To say, embark on something that has totally beyond that, it just doesn't work unless you have infinite energy. You're willing to break free of everything. But here's what the Rebbe says. In order to accomplish, here's an amazing idea, which I just saw today, meaning these ideas I think we discuss every year, but this is, by Avram, now here's the thing. God put all of existence into our hands. Hashem gave us everything. And we call the shots. The way we are, that's how God is with us. I just read this the other day, someone sent me a WhatsApp. God reveals himself to Moshe the first time at the burning bush, and he said, God, what's your name? He says, Ek Eke asher eke, which translated means I will be that which I will be. So I heard an interesting interpretation to that. I will be to you that which I am to you the way you are. Eke, meaning the way you define me to be. And I said, however you are with me, that's how, to the degree that we trust him, that's how God comes through. So this is the same concept, and that is to reveal God's essence down here below in this world. That means, what's the world? The world is a world of definitions. The world is a world of limitations. The world is a world of laws of nature, of laws of physics, laws of science. Things operate with certain boundaries and definitions which make everything up to be what they are. To have the essence of God, the being that has no definitions and no boundaries and no specifics and nothing revealed in these limitations. So we determine that by us being a part of him when we strip away our own definitions and uncover our essence and reveal that not up there but in our daily lives, in daily living. What that means is that when you approach someone, you ask them for help in whatever it is, there can be a willingness to help, and the person doesn't limit themselves to being stuck to what they're good at or what I am limited in or how I see myself. But I don't mean that every time. It means just your devotion to fulfilling your mission on earth, your dedication to doing what God needs of you to do, is that you don't lock yourself up in the certain definitions that others has given you, or even that you have given yourself, or even natural, deeply ingrained natures and forms and ideologies that you've already. Is that you're willing to go beyond everything, and that means giving God your essence, because your essence is not defined by anything. These are only the shapes and the forms of expressions of the soul, not the essence of the soul. So by Avraham Avinu's essence being revealed, that brings the Ebershter's essence, God's essence, also to revealed in the physical world. In where? In Aretz. And that's what the giving of the Torah is, the fusion of earth with essence, the essence of all essences. That's the meaning of having a home in this physical world for God, fusing the upper and the lower. So here the Rebbe says this was the novelty of Lech Lecha. And until Lech Lecha we didn't have it. Avram until then was operating without that empowerment. He was operating within a certain defined existence. It was only at this moment when he broke free. And that's why also the commandment, think about it. The words of the commandment are Lech, go. What the idea of go means go away. And go away means, the real go away means away, means that where you're going has no relationship to where you were before. That means an infinite leap, a boundless jump. And Avraham Avinu doesn't just go, but as the Torah describes Abraham from here, is that he's halach v'nasayah. He becomes a goer, and a goer means a go-awayer, and go-awayer means there's nothing that can stop him, nothing that can limit him, nothing that can define him. He's youthful, new, ambitious, and willing to, and anything is possible, whatever he's charged with. Obviously, if you're following the Ebershter's command, you have power in that, because God is empowering you. We limit ourselves because we think of ourselves as doing our own thing. The moment we're realizing that each and every one of us is an agent of God, then we're not limited even by our personality traits and even by our deeply in psychological structure. We're not even limited by that. Yes, we can do the impossible, all of us. But the main thing is there has to be that willingness, there has to be that openness, that saying to God, Hineni, I'm here. And Avraham Avinu did that. And when he did that, that's when so now the journey itself is very important. So the Rebbe continues, and the Rebbe says that the journey itself, the Lech Lecha journey that Avraham Avinu went, was multi-directional. It was in two directions. What do we mean multi-directional? He's going from Mesopotamia, He's going to the land that will later be the land of Israel. Then it was the land of Canaan. The fact that he's going from Mesopotamia there means that his journey is then upward. It's an elevation. He's gaining an elevation. He's going from a lowlier land in spiritual quality to a loftier place, to a godlier place. That means that the journey that Hashem tells him is an upward journey to a more spiritual place. But on the other hand, we know that the journey of Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha Me'artzecha, also represents a downward journey. In other words, more influence on the world, engaging more of humanity, reaching out to circles that are farther away than your circle of influence. Everybody has a certain comfort zone, which, your initial people you have impact on. These are the people who are like-minded. They think like you. They become your fans. They become your support system. They're the ones who are likely agreeing with you. But then you have people that's standing at a distance. They don't agree with what you're saying, thinking, and so on. And if you have a message of truth, and so on and so forth, and you're kind of shy and timid and afraid and not confrontational, and therefore you just kind of remain within your comfort, the Lech Lecha of Avram Avinu was to break him out of his comfort, to go to places where his teachings are very foreign and distant and removed, all the way far, to have global impact, global reach to the farthest of people, to the farthest of ideologies and ideas and philosophies and cultures, and there bring his truth. And that's the second element of the journey. One is a journey away from the world, deeper into self, and the other one is a journey outward, more influence and more impacting the lower elements of creation, the lower elements where there is more resistance. And the Rebbe says these two journeys converge. Here's a beautiful, and to the point, what's the epitome of that journey? The epitome of that outward journey. So again, there's an inward journey into your nucleus, into your essence, into the place, as we spoke earlier, where you're not defined by any definitions. You're moving beyond your intellect. You're moving beyond your emotions. You're moving beyond your desires. You're moving even beyond your pleasure. You're moving to the very unidentifiable self. But at the same time, again, as we said before, you're moving outwards. Now, the outward journey you find is you see it in the end of the Torah. How you see that Lech Lecha is also outward is in the end of the Torah, of this Torah portion. You have a name change. Avram's name previously was Avram, and now God changes his name and it becomes Avraham. Now what's the difference? Avram, as the Rashi says, means you are a father for Aram. Aram is a word referring to Israel, the Jewish people, to an exalted nation. Till now you were the father of a small, as we said earlier, a small nucleus of people, only your descendants. And now that I'm adding the hey to your name, and your name becomes Avraham with an extra hey, that means that Avhamon Goyim Nesatich, I've made you the father of multitudes of nations. That means you become the influencer on a global scale. You will impact all of humanity and all of the world. Now he says, so that's the end of the Torah, where you see that outward expansion. Now he says these two are looped together, because in order to touch your essence, to connect to your essence, it's not always through soul searching, it's not always through isolation, through removal from things. Quite on the contrary. The more you battle outward, the more you reach to places that you were shy or uncomfortable with, the more you break out of your comforts and the things that define us, all of us, in where we are, the more we're willing to engage to a more to influence, to farther. And again, obviously that means more resistance and it's more painful and it's difficult. And by willing to take take on difficult things and so on and so forth, that uncovers your essence. That itself reveals the. So an outward influence helps you journey to a deeper self, and it works the other way around as well. An identification with a deeper truth of your existence empowers you to go further out, and that's in two directions. The inwardness and the outwardness are connected to each other. The further in you go, the greater influence you can have out. And sometimes you don't know your inner abilities until you're willing to take on the challenge and go out to connect to the inner. And that happened by Avram. Okay. Now, and what's the ultimate objective? So what's the ultimate objective? The ultimate objective is that this godliness that Avraham Avinu has at his inner core, at his inner core, these deep convictions of the divine, the experience of God, the unity, the oneness of God that he sees and experiences at the core of his being, should be expand and should reach and should become the reality of the most remote entities of this world, all the way to the physical, should experience that unity, literally the physical. So, and that, as we see, is going to be the objective of the Jewish people, the ultimate objective, and that's what the Torah is going to do. So, so we can understand how this work of Avraham Avinu is a preparation for the giving of the Torah, because the giving of the Torah is going to actualize that on a whole new level, because we can actually do a mitzvah. You can take something physical and in an instant, infuse it with divine content. Now, this will also explain, the Rebbe says, why Parshas Lecha is the third Torah portion. Why is Lecha the third Torah portion? It's the third Torah portion because number 3 is pivotal over here. We discussed this a lot this year. 3 is the number of harmony. 1, you're alone, there's no one to fight with, but there's no one to be in harmony with. 2, it's calling for trouble. 2 already is conflict. 3 is fusion. So you see that in the three Torah portions. First Torah portion is God creating. So even though it's a creation, but it's God creating. So it's all about God. He created. It's not about the creation. It's about God creating a creation. The next Torah portion, Noach, which is number 2, which you can actually see it in the introduction to the name of the parsha is Noach, but the Torah says twice the word Noach, Noach, Noach. So it's emphasizing number 2, represents the second element, which is creation. And the creation onto its own, not yet attached. On the one hand, creation not attached, then it becomes denigrated to who knows what. But there's another element, and we're not focusing on the negative. The Rebbe doesn't even mention that I mentioned, doesn't even go there. He mentions the idea that creation starts to struggle with its own identity. And that's the whole Noach's work. Noach is a tzaddik. He tries to figure himself out, where he stands amongst humanity, tries to influence people. They're not listening to him. In the end, there is a flood, and the flood is part of the purification. It's the world kind of going through therapy. It's the world seeking to uncover its own truth. It's in a state of exploration. So it's the world's refinement. And then there is, as we said before, there is number 1. And what's Shlishi? What's the third parsha, Lech Lecha? Is the reason it's the fusion of both. Here you can have the first joint effort of man and God together, to fuse together the divine and the creation. That's what number 3 is. That's why the Torah was given in the 3rd millennium. And Avraham Avinu comes literally at the beginning of the 3rd millennium to start. Torah was given almost in the middle of the 3rd millennium. Avraham Avinu was right at the onset of the 3rd millennium. And Lech Lecha is the 3rd Torah portion, emphasizing, highlighting that the power of number 3 is kicking in. Now, watch this amazing idea unfold, and how this is again prophetic for what's happening right now. It's just unbelievable. So, we spoke earlier how Lech Lecha, the beginning of the Torah portion, represents the idea of the defined and the limited freeing itself from its limitations and boundaries, first through a human being making that break in connecting and fusing, and then injecting that in the world, beginning the process of this unification. But now we're going to see how the end of the Torah portion, which is the mitzvah of circumcision and Brit Mila, is the full realization of that in a manner so much stronger than what than even Lech Lecha. Now, what is that? We know that in order to do a mitzvah today, I mentioned earlier, it's a preparation work, even though God commanded us, but to make it possible for that to work, we needed to have first the mitzvahs of our forefathers. It says that Avram and Isaac, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our patriarchs and matriarchs, they did all the mitzvahs. And by them doing the mitzvahs, they empowered us. But it explains, it's discussed, that the mitzvahs that they did not have the same impact like our mitzvahs. And our mitzvahs sublimate the physical. When you take leather and you make it into tefillin, it becomes holy. Literally, it's a holy object. That object is godly. That's why you would treat tefillin with a lot of holiness. If God forbid a pair of tefillin falls on the floor without the cover, the person fasts. It's serious. It's like like a Torah scroll falling, God forbid, or something like that. It's a godly entity. Abraham's tefillin didn't have that holiness. Couldn't, because it's a physical object. What holy, what godly? It's physical. Physicality, it's material. It's matter. That's all that it is. They couldn't do it. It says there was one mitzvah. But yet it was a preparation. But in order for the mitzvahs that they did to serve as a real preparation for us, to link it to our mitzvahs, there had to be one mitzvah that had the qualities of post-giving of the Torah, and that was the mitzvah of circumcision. The one mitzvah that our forefathers did that was similar to our mitzvah, to which there's holiness in the object, is the mitzvah of bris, of circumcision. As we find in the Torah, that we find that there was that Avraham Avinu treated his own bris Mila as an entity of holiness. He tells Eliezer to take an oath through the bris Mila. And that was because there was actual holiness in the bris. So that's and through that mitzvah, all the other mitzvahs that the forefathers did are PowerPoints for our mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says, why the mitzvah of bris Mila? Why is this the mitzvah in which our forefathers were able to in a sense, it's the first mitzvah ever where the godly and the mundane mix. Why did God choose this mitzvah, bris Mila? He says, because this mitzvah, the nature of the mitzvah, expresses this very idea. Because the nature of the mitzvah is that the physical flesh of a human being has a divine mark. God's stamp is on the physical flesh of a person. Well, isn't that what mitzvahs are all about? To make a mark of divinity is that the physical is not physical. The physical, it too is godly. So which mitzvah? You give tzedakah, okay? You did God's will through a coin and through your hand, but there's no change in the actual hand that identifies it with godliness. If you know that giving charity is a mitzvah, then you know that something godly has taken place. You don't see it to the naked eye that there is a change. In the circumcision, there's a mark. God's mark is on it. God says it's ois, it's a sign, bris, of the covenant. God's covenant is etched in the physical body. So that mitzvah expresses this. One step deeper. Not only is it in the physical body, but it is the physical body that is identified most with sinfulness. It's in the physical part of the body which is associated, as Rambam says, with most evil inclination, Yitzhahara, and so on and so forth, with physical intimacy, which is one of the most corruptible elements in the human experience until we rectify it. And yet the bris Mila is in the very, 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 very element of that part, or that Yitzhahara infected, so to speak, part of the body, which is indicating that godliness will reach not just low, but into the lowest of the low, to reveal that too is saintly, is sacred. And the Rebbe says something so special, and not only in the fact that we don't corrupt it, that we keep our intimacy holy and directed and focused to what God wants, and we don't use it, God forbid, in unholy ways, but even deeper than that, that intimacy itself becomes holiness. Not that it's not corrupted, we don't do anything bad, but what we do is godly, not just pure, godly. In what might be the darkest section of human experience, and yet there too that also is godly. That's after Mashiach godly, an expression of the divine, not in any way evil inclination, no Yetzer Hara. That is the ultimate objective of all of mitzvahs. That's why the first commandment symbolizes it and activates it. And that's why, hear this, and here's what I believe the prophecy is. That is the reason why, through the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Brit Mila, that's when God changed Avram Avinu's name from Avram to Avraham. Remember we explained earlier, that's when he gets his name changed. Why? What's the content of the name change? Content of the name change is that you're not detached. Avram means detached, exalted father. You're not a holy, saintly man that everybody pays respect to, and then everybody goes back to doing their own corrupted things. No. You become the father of multitudes of nations. You become the boss of the world. You become the leader of all of humanity. You become the influencer of all of humanity. You break through into every element of human experience, and into every party. You're there. Avraham Avinu was there, declaring God's oneness, God's truth, and therefore everything has to be geared towards holiness. Brit Mila is where God creeps into the lowest tier of physicality, and that's why, in the merit of this mitzvah, Avraham becomes the father of all nations. Avram becomes the father of all nations. He permeates all of humanity. And he has the ability, hear these words, he says, he has the ability to take the most hostile cultures, communities, peoples, phenomenon in the world, whatever it is, and turn them around. To be supportive of holiness, and not just supportive, but included in Kedusha and holiness. Revealers of godliness. The ultimate conquest of the furthest of the first. And that's the meaning, I will show, I will reveal you, I will reveal your godliness to the entire world. That's the ultimate achievement of what? Of the Torah. And here's the thing, that's the conclusion of Parshas Lech. The Rebbe doesn't say this explicitly, but it's like taken out of it. So now that we're standing in the year 3,333 years of the giving of the Torah, which number 3 is the theme of this fusion, the theme of Parshas Lech Lecha. So in this year, what happened? Avram's name again becomes recognized in the world. In what sense? That the hostile elements in creation flip over and become allies to holiness. The Abraham Accords are signed. And the Abraham's Accords that are being signed, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, is the most powerful, amazing transformation in humanity regarding recognition of God's authority and holiness in this world. And who is it being dealt with? It happened with peoples that were the most opposed to God's will regarding the land of Israel, dead bent on war against it. That's the Emirates and the Bahrainis, but it reached even lower now. It reached a terrorist state. Sudan, which was actually a country supporting terrorism, the Bahrainis were not, at least not outwardly, and they were, and yet they're flipping over. And they're going and they're talking about it. You just read what they're saying. It's just so mind-blowing. This is Avram. And they're revealing Avram. The land that I will show you. Avram is becoming again a factor. He is the one who's now dominating what we call firstly, he's dominating the discussion. It's crazy. Abraham. When Abram started in Lech Lecha, number 3, after 3,333 years since the Torah was given, which is the power of 3, we have 3 nations. But we have, what do we have? We have Avram Avinu again, openly. He's back on stage. That's what I'm saying. He wasn't here for thousands of years. Who spoke of Abraham? I mean, we spoke of Abraham. But like that he's a factor that changes policy, that is impacting, influences millions of people. Yeah, it's the Abraham Accords. And it's just starting. It's going to follow with many, many nations. This is stunning. Now, let me just wrap it up with the part that I want to answer the question that we began with. So in Perek Yud Aleph, the Rebbe says, he says like this. Now we'll understand why the introduction of Lech Lecha is, and the work of Lech Lecha is important to the conclusion of the giving of the Torah, as we spoke earlier, and to the completion of both the receiving of the Torah and the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. How that makes, and the fact that we do this preparation today, how all of that leads to the shleimus, the completion of the receiving of the Torah. Because there's one more point up here. The other aspect, highly noticed and spoken of in Parshas Lech Lecha, okay, we had Bris Mila, we had Avram Avinu abandoning everything and having global influence, reaching out to teach the world, to inspire, and to break free from his own, from whatever defined him earlier. We had that, and we had the idea of Bris Mila, which is this fusion. Now comes the other concept, which is the God promising him the land. So much of Parshas Lech Lecha is Hashem promising Avram Avinu the land of Israel. He keeps on repeating it again and again. Then there's the covenant, and then even the Bris Mila, he again speaks to him about that your children will inherit the land. Why is this so crucial? What's this whole concept again and again about the land and again? And the answer is, taking possession of the land of Israel is the essence, the Jewish people taking possession of the land of Israel is the essence of this whole project of sublimating the world. Because where does that express itself? That the material world is elevated and becomes godly geographically in the land of Israel. Because the land of Israel is a land like all other geographic locations. It's physical, it's earth, and it was inhabited by non-Jewish nations who lived life of paganism and very unholy lives. Jews enter that land and convert that land into the land of Israel with all of the qualities that the land of Israel has as a godly land, which has holiness and sanctity and certain mitzvahs apply and so on and so forth. So it's fundamental. I mean, God could have separated the land of Israel and made it Jewish from the very day one, but that's not the point. The whole objective was, as we said earlier, that there should be a low world, and we should convert that world, we should elevate the world. And as very much at the epicenter of that exercise, of that project, is taking the land of Israel and making it holy. And that is the reason why so many mitzvot of the Torah didn't apply until we went into the land of Israel. Because that's almost like a preparation stage. It's when you'll go into the land and you'll conquer it and change it, and call this land a Jewish land, not the Canaan land anymore. It's the Jewish land, which means it's a Torah land, it's a godly land. That creates the connection between the godly and the material. And matter, soil, earth, Earth becomes holy. The one similar to Bris Mila. We said before, Bris Mila makes the body is holy. And in the body itself, a lower part of the body. So Bris Mila is the declaration on the human body that the human body is holy. But we know that when we purify the world, we have to purify our bodies, but we also have to purify the actual world itself. The soil of the world, the earth, the air, everything. That, it's almost like conquering Eretz Yisrael is similar to the Brit Mila of the world. It's the circumcision, so to speak, of the world. It's the elevation of the world. Through the land of Israel, we're given the empowerment. If we can make that land holy, we can make the whole world holy through mitzvahs. So that's how the subject of taking the land of Israel is all part of this Lech Lecha, which is, again, number 3, the fusion of the godly and the mundane. And that's the reason why there is so much resistance in the world for Israel to have the land, for Jews to have the land of Israel. There's the whole energy behind the whole Palestinian campaign. And this, that so many people in the world have made this issue so much their issue. It's not about humanitarianism or whatever. It's not about a sense of justice for the underdog. If that would be the case, there's so many other places in the world, hotspots, where you can point your finger and say, there has been people that have been taken advantage of, like you might argue. Why pick on Israel? Why is Israel the place where it gets all the condemnation? You can go through and see how many condemnations there are in the UN against Israel. Tiny little, more than all the other countries put together, that violate human rights in the worst way, and yet it's all against Israel. It has nothing to do with the Palestinian people. It's a terror, it's a subconscious fear. If only we explain to the world how beautiful, how magnificent, how rich, how unbelievably exciting life will be when everything turns godly. But until that moment, people are terrified of that dream. In other words, Jews having the land of Israel opens up the door for every single human being on the planet to experience God in his or her bedroom, in his or her kitchen, and that God becomes your reality. And that terrifies people, subconsciously. But that's changing. That's the beauty of what's changing. And therefore, the Rebbe says, and now we'll understand, let's wrap it all up together. Therefore, he says, we can understand that since both circumcision and let me put it this way, since the work of Lech Lecha, of our forefathers, and again, as it applies to us today, the work of Lech Lecha serves as an introduction and a laying the ground, as we said earlier, for the giving of the Torah, which is the fusion of the godly and the worldly and the godly. And what's the content of Lech Lecha? The content of Lech Lecha is 2 things: conquering of a land and Bris Mila and circumcision. Therefore, we understand that if there's a lack in the conquest of the land, there's a lack in the Torah's effect on the world. There's a lack in the whole idea of the Torah. When the land is fully conquered, we can have the full influence of Torah. As we said earlier, the Torah is not complete until Mashiach comes and we'll get the future Torah. But why can't that Torah be revealed? Because we haven't finished conquering the land. Therefore, when we take not just 7 lands, but when we take the full 10 lands of Israel, that means that the sublimation of the physical is including all the parts, all 10. When that is accomplished, then the true objective and the godliness of the Torah, which is the revelation of God that will completely permeate all of existence to its fullest, only then can that be achieved. So therefore we understand why we're still in the amateur stage of Lech Lecha. We're still holding by Lech Lecha because we didn't finish conquering the land of Israel. And when we will finish that, then we can go ahead to Sinai and receive the Torah. Even though we've done it all, but we've done it all in an imperfect state. Now we have to do it in a perfect state. So the conquest of the land of Israel is not just for Israel to be the fullest, but for the Torah to be the fullest. Because again, the objective of the Torah, which is the fusion of heaven and earth, the fusion of godly, the infinite and the finite, is dependent on this preliminary work of taking a mundane land and making it into a godly land, which its completion is the land when it will be all 10 lands. So that is the idea. We didn't finish, but we went all the way till chapter 13. Bez Hashem next week. It's a small little ending. We will complete. Meanwhile, let's see big miracles, and especially miracles that are needed in order to keep this motion of the Abraham Accords and all of that in motion. I think, obviously, at least from a natural perspective, it seems like it will be a lot dependent on the results of November 3rd. Let us hope that we should see it. Big miracles. Be'ezras Hashem.